All right, so this is important. So next, this is important. First thing y'all can see at the top, what's that say? Raleigh, North Carolina, right? This is a news article from Raleigh in March 23, 1853. This is long ago it was, right? It's talking about Jewish Negroes. And it says the Reverend, I have to get close on this, the Reverend Dr. Philip, missionary in the north of Africa, gives the following details concerning that country. A Russian Jew. So the man is a Russian Jew, right? Bless you. Bless you. Resident at Madab gave his information concerning a great number of Israelites inhabiting the oasis of Sahara, right? Sahara Desert. And dwelling also at Batar. I can't say that. Bisrab, Tugart, Bosra, Ben Uzeb, Loquest, etc. So these are the places we need to be looking at. Hey, Shabbat Shalom. Thank y'all for coming. So these are the places that we definitely need. There's a chair right here too. Right here. There's an extra one that she can take back there so they can sit together if needed. So it says these are in each of these places, even more. In one place, he found 600 families with numerous synagogues and about a mint, some of which were more ancient than, I can't see that part. So these are ancient synagogues in West Africa, right? So this is Raleigh talking about this. Raleigh paper talking about it from a Russian Jew. All right, it's going to get more detailed, right? But it says, but this is not all. Other curious details reached Dr. Philip from another source, a Jew who had accompanied a German traveler as far as Timbuktu. So we've been talking about Timbuktu, right? It says, found near the boundary of Bambara a large number of Jewish Negroes. Nearly every family among them possesses the law of Moses written upon parchment. Although they speak of the prophets, they have not their writings. The prayers differ from those of other Jews. So why would their prayers differ, right? They said they're the ancient ones, though, right? So it says, and are committed to little leaves of parchment stitched together and contain numerous passages derived from the Psalms. These Jews have mingled some of the superstitions of oral law, which they have not committed to writing. So remember, the Talmud is the oral law written. So they're trying to say they worship differently, but they still have some type of oral law among them, right? With those of their neighbors are the Mohammedans and the heathen. They enjoy equal liberty with other subjects of the African chiefs in their synagogues and their the R word, I don't like saying that word. That means master. But the explanation of which give of themselves in connection with their black skin. So they made a dog. They call them Negro with black skin, right? So there's no doubt there. Is this, that after the destruction of Jerusalem, so that's 70 AD, so that's what we're reading in the scripture, in that Luke scripture I just read earlier, at the time of their captivity, so remember what Yahushua said. He said, you'll be sent captives throughout all nations, some of their ancestors having neither goods nor, I can't make out that word, fled to the desert. All right, so I will keep on reading. The fatigue which they endured was so great that nearly all the females died by the way. The children of Ham received them with kindness, and by intermarriage with their daughters, who were black, communicated their color to their children. These children became generation by generation of a deeper hue, until no differences of color now distinguish the children of Shem and those of Ham. The former of their features, however, is very different from the Negroes around them. These are highly interesting facts and create a strong desire that these unexplored regions may speedily open to intercourse with the civilized world. Access to these ancient manuscripts, which are probably older than any other now extant, who would be of great value in correcting the received Hebrew text in throwing light upon doubtful passage. So they talk about these Jews. This is Raleigh, North Carolina, talking about this article in 1853 about these Jews living in the Sahara. And they had ancient scripts older than all the other scripts, right? So this is what I'm talking about. This is fact, right? There's no this is not something in, conspiracytheory.com. It's not in AfricanBeYourPower.com. This is coming from the Raleigh newspaper, right? So it's important because it said something about the Bambara, right? So if you look, this is my DNA over here. So I know I got family in Mali. I met them and everything, right? So it says, you know, talks about the different, this is ancestry. That's why I said you got to take your ancestry test, right? And then it talks about the different groups, ethnic groups of Mali, right? And the first one says what? Bambara. So the Bambara were known to be the African Jews of Mali. So this is what it comes to majority of everybody's DNA, especially in this area. North of your family is rooted in North Carolina, South Carolina, because I'm going to read another article as well. So there was some text on the side over there on the right. When I clicked on, so this is where you find the article. And make sure people know, because they can people make up generated article newspaper. So I want to make sure people know exactly where you can see it in the newspaper. If you can go to, I think it's newspaper.com and get it there. But it says, this was the note: Jewish Negroes near the boundary of Bambara entering into Mali. It makes sense being that so many people are saying it. The Bambara were brought to South Carolina, to Georgia, the French colonies in large numbers. If you map out the areas, you will see every black art form, and the one black church that is still essentially African was packed with nothing but Bambara, Turags, and Fulani people. So whatever's in South Carolina, we got to get your people to help us out. South Carolina and Georgia, there was some church. They didn't say what church this was, but maybe we can go and find it, right? So it's very important because who all, you know, if you know about North Carolina all the way down to Florida, well, who are major people in that area? What are they called? Gullah Geechee. Anybody not heard of the Gullah Geechee? All right. So Gullah is so important for that's the oldest connection to Africa for African Americans, the Gullah people, Gullah Geechee people, right? So it's important. So if we go to the next, this is Lorenzo Dow Turner. So he lived from 1890 to 1972, and he's called the father of Gullah studies. And where is he from? Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So, you know, we got some stuff here like, you know, it's very interesting that a lot of people don't realize that North Carolina starts the Gullah Geechee corridor. So Jacksonville, North Carolina, all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida, all that, if you came off, if one of your ancestors came off a slave ship, you are Gullah Geechee. So it's very important because here they don't really have all the food and, you know, restaurants and all that stuff. But, you know, they do. The guy from Nebraska, the mayor, he's the one, I talked to him. He told me about the Gullah Geechee corridor that he helped establish, right? So Michael Jordan, we talked about all that. Chubby Checker, Michelle Obama, all these people are Gullah Geechee, right? So he's the one, the reason why he's important, because the next article, oh, did I not put it in there? Oh, yeah, I got it in there. Next article. All right, so this is somebody who wrote this paper at Montclair University, somewhere in New Jersey, right? They got a big online presence, I guess. But the origin of Gullah, Frances Moore, and this is the paper she wrote based upon his book, all right? So she even talks about how many of the Africans, so she basically talks about the people of the Gullah Geechee culture and where they come from. She saves some time. So newspapers of the day advertised the arrival of Africans from particular regions. These rice-producing cultures stretched from Senegal to the Ivory Coast and included Cape Verde and Sierra Leone. So these are some of the tribes that's connected, right, that came off the ship together. So if you think about them being separate and they come together, they're enslaved, and now they're, you know, interbreeding, and now that becomes who we are today, right? Such ethnic groups as the Bambara, the Fula, the Malinke, the Songhai, the Sarah, Mindi, Timni, Kissi, Papal, and Baga utilize their own techniques to cultivate rice. My understanding in Georgia, when I talked to them, they said the Geechee comes from the Kissi people. So the Kissi people are related to a people called the Da or the Dan, if you know one of the tribes of Israel is called Dan, right? And they actually had, it's in French, but they got English subtitles, so I might show it one day. But they had even Jewish people went down there to talk to them and said that their culture is connected to the way they dress. They even call their God Yahweh or a form of Yahweh. And I was on Ancestry. Somebody from Liberia said he was from the Da tribe. He knew all about it. They also called it Yacoba tribe. Jacob, that's the name of their tribe. You can just Google it and see it. So they're also connected to the Kissi people. So all these people are connected, right? The Malinke people, we were talking about, I think yesterday, is talking a little bit about the Songhai Empire and how that started with the Hebrew guy from Yemen. And then even the Soninke, thought I said Soninke. Did I say Soninke? Maybe not. But the Soninke are the ones that actually came over to start one of the biggest tribes in West Africa at the time. And he actually was a Yemenite as well. So, but then in the next drop down, it then talks about the same thing to just make sure that people, has a cross-reference. It says the Africans brought to South Carolina and Georgia came from a section along the west coast, extending from Senegal to Angola, including Sierra Leone, Liberia, that's where the Da people are, Ivory Coast, Togo. Togo is where we had the interview with the Ewe lady, Miss Sayron, when she writing the book, and Dahomey. They're all in that area. The Ewe people as well. Other ones too, Fawn, all these people. And in other words, the slaver obtained Africans from the same area and brought them to the same area in the New World. The vocabulary of the Gullahs consists of the words found in the following language: Wolof, Malinke, Mandinka, Bambara, Fula, Hausa, Igbo, Ibobo. Remember these tribes we talked about, hopefully in the past. We talked a lot about them. Mindi, Va, Twi, Fanti, Ga. Ga is Gad, right? And they know they come from Israel and know they're the tribe of Gad. Ewe, that's why we call ourselves Ewe, the Ibri. That's where we get that from. Fan, Yoruba, Benin, we got a Yoruba right there. Congo, Ubundu, Kimbundu, and a few others. So we can see how our people are coming all together now, right? It's just amazing how they took the people from them, brought them to America to the same places. They all intermingled. So that means all of them got that Hebrew DNA going through us, right? So that's why it says it's so important for you to learn your DNA, because next, this is the chart I always refer back to, right? From Black demographics, it shows you from what regions came to what states in America. So when we start seeing some of those regions, like we were just talking about, they're on the windward coast in Senegambia. You can see the percentages that's in green from Senegambia is 15%, and then 20% here, 45% from Congo. That's where some people say is the Gullah from Gola, Angola. And then you also have a Gola tribe also in Liberia. That's cousin with the Mendi, the what's the one? Da tribe and all them. Yacoba, they all cousins, right? So you can see where in North Carolina, we got mixtures of Virginia and South Carolina, right? Got the Outer Banks, so a lot of slave ships couldn't come through. Some did come through, like the Fula people, and other people were taken as enslaved and brought here to North Carolina directly, but it was only a few. So we get people from both sides mixed in together. All right, any questions about that? That's just a quick one, but that's a small part of my overall presentation, but hopefully you're starting to see how the stuff that we're doing and the stuff that you're learning and all this stuff is starting to come together. Yes?
You just have somebody who said they're Gullah Geechee.
Gullah Geechee, all right, yes.
They were bought here for rice cultivation.
Yes, so that's they call Carolina Gold. Anybody heard of Carolina Gold? Carolina Gold, you talk a lot about that, right? You don't hear about it, but when they went to Barbados first, and they had the sugar plantations that they enslaved a lot of our people, and they were just killing them left and right. And then when it came to America, there wasn't a lot of people who were enslaved that came to America, so they had to preserve them, right? They had to treat them right? It's kind of like a mule or something, right? You don't want your mule to die because it means you can't farm and stuff, so we would treat it like that. But, so they chastise us, but they didn't want to kill us, right? So that's when people used to run, they cut off their foot. They wouldn't kill them, they would just cut off their foot so they couldn't run no more, because they still would use them in some capacity, even when they're older, younger, whatever. So even with the people that's here, that they actually came with the integration of in America, a lot of them came from Barbados. So the sugar, because they ran out of land. Barbados is a small island, right? So they couldn't put so much sugar on that island. So they said, what's the next thing we can do? They said, rice. That's where you get Carolina Gold from, because it would start making so much money. And Carolinas, I'm talking about one Carolina, South Carolina and North Carolina. And they came here and they brought the Barbados people who were enslaved. We got a Barbados in here too, right? We got all these people we're naming right here in this room. It's just amazing. And then, from there, it kind of continued to, evolve, and more people, they needed more slaves, so they made more slaves. And that's where our culture comes from, right? So a lot of the Gullah Geechee is mixed with Barbados. And it's interesting because Barbados has the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere, the oldest synagogue. So now it's been changed. It was when they first they claimed that, before it was tore up by a hurricane and then they had to renovate it. But the question is, who was doing it before it was taught way back when there was only like black people on the island. Who were the people that was doing all this, right? So we know even in Wilmington, there's a synagogue here in Wilmington. One of the old synagogues on the western side, I think, of the United States, they said, is in Wilmington. And it's actually made in a Moorish way, like Spain and Portuguese way. So a lot of us will have Sephardic Jew in your DNA. So that's why they call us Negro. Negro is a Spanish word, not a British word. So the British were the ones who enslaved us. Why didn't they just call us black? Why they call us the Spanish word, Negro? So that's when we talked about Yaya Negro, the guy that was called Yaya Negro that lived in Spain and Portugal. And he was descended from King David, and he was a royal. So a lot of his descendants were called Negro too. So you gotta, I'm finding cousins with that. That's what I'm researching right now. I'm finding cousins with that same history too. So that's what I'm saying. If you start looking up your history, you start finding stuff where nobody can deny it, right? That's the kind of stuff we want. We don't want to just go off of memes and stuff, right? We want to go off of fact. So once we know we the people, then what does that mean when we read the word, right? When he said, I'm calling you back to be a people. What does that mean now? He's talking to you, right? You're coming back. He said when you were sent as captives, when Yahushua said that. And now in the Song of Moses, he says, right, I sent you away, scattered you as captives. Why is he saying I was scattered you as captives? All this stuff starts to make more sense. So your life is very important. Our children, it's important to bring them up knowing who they are. Why are they trying to take history away from us in North Carolina, right? Make black history illegal. It's like, this is strange stuff that's going on. But we actually know that Yah is more powerful than anything else. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
When you were saying that the Americans, the slaves were treated better because they didn't get as many as like the.
Right.
What was the reason that you were saying?
Because in the Caribbeans, right, they were shipping them up like tons. So it was just, they were killing, like, work hard, you die on the spot, you just throw them to the side, and you get another one. But here in America, a lot of them weren't being shipped here as often, right? It's just think about, it's like a supply and demand. We were product, right? A lot of product was going down there, a lot of product won't coming up here, so they had to preserve them. So that's the reason why we also were more able, I would say, where we lost our culture, right? Because they were Christianized a lot of us, right? Where down there, they just let them kind of like, hey, as long as you come do your work, you can go out and you still, that's the reason why you see still a lot of voodoo and stuff right down there where you don't see as much up here. You might see hoodoo that's mixed in with the church, but voodoo come straight from Benin, right? So all that went straight there to Louisiana, to Haiti, and all these places. That's why you see it so much stronger there than you do here. Thank you for asking. Anybody else? Yes, buddy? Yeah, we do not worship for him. No, we don't worship no false gods. We don't do no voodoo. That's right. That's my man. I tell you, he be coming with it. Wait a minute, was he the one that said thou shalt not kill? That's the one. We got a minister already in the making. A young age, man. He listening too. He's like, thou shalt not, don't forget that. All right. So we're here to the lesson. Do we have any questions so far? Anything before I start with the lesson that we discussed or anything? Because this is the time I want to make sure if we have visitors and guests and people have questions about something, we can answer it. So anything we got before I start? All right. So I gave you an opportunity. I didn't know if your hands could be raised. No, okay. So next. Is that? Oh, it's not me. So this is the fair use. So any kind of charts and stuff I got off the internet and stuff. So this is fair use unless I just made something up. All right. So next, I got some questions for y'all. All right. So do you know now this is an old lesson. Some of y'all might know this. This is like years ago lesson. But do you know that the mountain that Yah descended on when he talked to Moses is still charred from the fire today? Anybody heard of that mountain? The mountain that's out there now. I'm thinking about nowadays. That's still burnt at the top. Sinai, but not, they gave it a modern name. Like if we were looking on the map and you Googled it, what would you Google? So it's out there. They did studies on it. They got pillars just like the story of Moses and everything out there. That's the one that they try. What's her name? Okay, Constantine, I think mother. Jebel Laws. So you just type that in, you'll see the charred mountain. They actually tested it and said something made it like glass, like charred on the top. The guy who did a lot of discoveries, his name is Ron Wyatt. So you type in Ron Wyatt, he did all these discoveries about the Red Sea and all kind of stuff that he found. Found Sodom, Gomorrah, and a whole bunch of other things. Yes?
You said it's from J-A-P-A-L?
Yes. You see that? Jabal al-Laws. I might not be saying it right. This is old stuff, so I might be a little rusty on it myself. So do you know that Judeans, or the Jews, were once ruled by a queen? Anybody know about that? There's actually two queens. Anybody knows either one of the two queens? What you say? Well, yeah, but she was out she was out in Persia. But yeah, I mean, you could kind of count her. That's when they were out in exile. But this was the one that actually ruled in Israel. It's you can Google it. I see some people Googling, that's fine. One is Attila. She's the daughter of Jezebel. And Jezebel is definitely a black woman, right? She's from the Sidon or the Hamites, and she married King Ahab, and Ahab's daughter is Attila. So she ended up marrying the side of Judah, and then her husband died, her son died, and then she tried to kill all the Judeans, all the Jewish, Judeans, the tribe of Judah's royal sons, her own grandson. She was out there trying to kill them all, and then she tried to take over rulership, and one was hidden and grew up and ended up killing her, and he ended up becoming king. All right, and the other one's Salome. She's during the time of Hanukkah and stuff. A lot of people don't talk about her during that time when they went with Hanukkah and basically came back over and ruled the temple. All right, or ruled Jerusalem again, redid the temple. So do you know Herod, the king of the Jews, wasn't an Israelite by blood, but married an Israelite princess who he killed? So Herod was what? What was his nationality? Edomite. Yes, Idumean. He was not an Israelite, but he was called king of the Jews because his father did good stuff with Julius Caesar, helped him, and Julius Caesar basically gave Herod rule over Judea. So he even went to war with the people to take it back over. So that's the reason why he was trying to kill the baby Yahusha, right? Because he didn't care about those people. It wasn't his people. He didn't care, right? So do you know Jerusalem was once renamed and turned into a Roman pagan city? So Judea was renamed to what? Anybody know? So where the Israelis, who are they fighting? Palestine. That's actually what was renamed way back then. It was Palestine. And Jerusalem was called a pagan city by the name of the Roman general, Arab something, Capitolina. So anytime you hear Capitol Hill or anything like that, that actually goes back to Roman paganism because they worship Jupiter, right? So when you talk about Capitol Hill, it's actually worship to Jupiter, where they get that from in Rome. All right. Do you know the difference between a Jew, Jewish, an Israelite, a Grecian, a Greek, and a Gentile? What's the difference between those? What's the difference between somebody who's Jew and somebody who's Jewish? Jewish, right? Fables is like a Jewish, like black and blackish, right? You're not kinda, but you're not really, right? So that's actually the definition in the Bible for the Greek word is kind of, sort of Jew, right? Jewish fables, it says. All right. Then you have what's the difference between a Jew and an Israelite? Yep, all 12 tribes, or 13, however you want to look at it. Yes, that's good. And then sometimes, can you repeat that? Yeah, he said Jew means you're from Judah, Judean, and the Israelite means you're from any of the 12 tribes. It's from a descendant of Jacob, Israel. So sometimes it does say, like, it says Israel and Judah. So anytime you hear that, it's basically saying the 10 tribes of the north and Judah of the south. So you got to know about the divisions and stuff that we talked about in the past. So 10 of the 10 tribes were lost. Well, they say lost, but was taken as captives to the Syrians. And then later on, everything else was the southern tribe. All right. And do you know why Paul was called a leader of the Nazarenes versus Christians, and how they differ from the Ebionites and other Messianic groups? So let's start.
Grecian and Greek.
I'm sorry. Yes. Grecian and Greek. Okay. Sorry. Sorry about that. What's the difference between a Grecian and a Greek?
Grecian, they were like the natives to the area, maybe. And then the Greek were the people who assimilated into the culture.
Yeah, that's good. So, and it's very important when we talk about the Tanakh or we talking about Brit Hadashah. And the Tanakh, Greek and the Grecian is the same. Greeks are the Grecian. And it's strange because when you get to the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, a Greek is a person who's a Greek. A Grecian means a Hellenized Israelite. Like, well, I mean, later on, they changed it, right? In the Tanakh, a Greek is a Grecian, they say. But that's in Hebrew. But when you get to the Greek language in the New Testament or Brit Hadashah, the Greek is a Greek and the Grecian is a Hellenized Israelite because they went through that whole Hellenization. You know, that's why we're against frats and sororities and all that, right? Because they were Hellenized into being part of the Greek society, like you were saying. I think that's what you're saying, right?
I said it the opposite.
Oh, okay. I was trying to help you out. Try to just honest. That's that honesty. Yeah.
So Grecian is a Israelite, but just been
Grecian is a colonized Israelite.
Okay.
Yeah, you can say it that way. Yeah, by the Greeks.
Okay.
Yep. And then you get to the Gentile. What's the difference between a Gentile and a Greek person or Grecian? What's the difference with a Gentile? Anybody that's not a 12. Greek, anybody. Anybody is a Gentile, right? I think in the article it was talking about heathens, right? That's what they usually refer to as a heathen too. But you hear it nowadays, they call them goyim. So if you hear goyim, that's important right now. If you start hearing that in the news, that's very important.
How often do black people, I'm saying in quotes,
Mhm.
Do their DNA and find out that they're not part of the 12 tribes? You know, or a Gentile, is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, what I've heard is that when some African Americans at least take their DNA, they would have J1 or R1, that's European. Because somewhere in the line, you know, they were raped, somebody was raped, and then they went down that male line. Because even once some of the slaves were, you know, the slave master slept with the slave and had a child, sometimes they'll give them a choice and say, do you want to be, you know, counted as a European or you want to live with slaves? So some of them chose being European. They were actually sent as enslaved. They didn't went back to Africa and enslaved other people. So they will still have that J1, R1 marker still in them. And then this Deuteronomy 28, it even says, you know, the woman, you'll be engaged to a woman and somebody else will sleep with them, right? So even though we still Israelites, after 400 years of intermarrying, you still might have R1 DNA. So that's why I don't go just based on DNA. Some people just strictly DNA, and I said there's no way you can do it strictly based on DNA. You can say what you are, but you can't say what you're not. So E1B1A to me is an Israelite. If you got that, you know you're Israelite, right? But if you have anything outside of that, like R1, right? R1 could be Egyptian. So in the story, which I do go through this lesson, but I don't have it, I didn't put it as part of today because it would take too long. But R1 means that, you know, at the beginning when they left Egypt, it says some Egyptian men went with them. And they integrated in. They said after 3 generations, an Egyptian can become an Israelite after they intermingle for 300 years, right? Or 3 generations. Same thing with Edomite. It said even the Edomite could come back and be an Israelite after 3 generations of intermingling. So that's what they usually say after 3 generations, even though your bloodline, I mean, DNA might go R1 because you still follow, you know, son of a son to an Egyptian. You as a people, when the nation was established, you're basically an Israelite even itself. So that's why I don't go between just DNA because that gets so confusing for people and, you know, messes people up. But we know as a people here in the United States, that's why I was saying we integrated for 400 years. So now we all one people, right? No matter what our background, some of our backgrounds could be Moors, right? They had the Egyptians living in America. They had, they called them the Lascars. They had, you know, Israelites. They had different people from different African tribes. That's not Israelite tribes, right? So, but all 400 years of mixing, we all one people, right? So that's what.
As a result of the intermingling
Oh yeah, over the years, right? That's what happened even with the Israelites. So that's what people get so caught up on DNA. DNA doesn't even make sense to me, really. It makes sense to help us to track back to Africa and stuff. But when you start thinking about DNA, they said that each letter is supposed to mutate after thousands and thousands of years, right? So that's the reason why we got E and R and J after thousands and thousands of years, right? So if that's true, think about that. right? So they say Ham is, some people say A1, right? They'll say Shem is E1 or E1B1, you know, those type of people. And then they say Japheth is like R1, or some people say J. Some people say J is Middle Eastern or whatever, right? If Ham, Shem, and Japheth, who are they fathers? They should all have the same exact DNA as Noah. So that doesn't make sense. So you got to be careful how people use or misuse that. Now, the categorization, there is a similar connection to all of us based upon the DNA, right? We can see how we're connected. But when they start trying to use it for or against our people, we got to be careful, right? That's when racism and stuff settles in too. You can't do that. All right. Good question. Somebody else had a hand? Yes.
Yeah, going back to the Judah and Israel thing, isn't another name for Israel as the 10 tribes Ephraim as well?
Yeah, well, yeah. So when the 10 tribes divided, right, that was under Rehoboam. So when Solomon did wrong, right, and y'all said, I'm going to take the kingdom from you, that's when Jeroboam and Rehoboam were there. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, and Jeroboam was the Ephraimite that came in that y'all said, I'm going to bless you, right? So when the kingdom divided, Jeroboam was the one that ruled the 10 tribes at the top, and Rehoboam was of Judah, the 2 tribes, right? So now you hear Yah sometimes refer to the 10 tribes as Ephraim. So if we even remember in the story, really at the beginning of our lineage coming out of Egypt, Ephraim was the strongest tribe, right? That's where Joshua comes from. Joshua was from Ephraim, right? So if you look at all the promises that, because Joseph was his descendant, he descended from Joseph, and Joseph was the very favorite son of Jacob. So that's what was the power with them. But then after so much, when Jeroboam and stuff messed up, that's when Yah traded the kingdom to David and start going down that line. So good question. So you'll hear it in prophecy. It then says Ephraim and Judah sometimes. So it's talking about the 10 tribes coming with the 2 tribes. Mm-hmm. Good question. Anybody else? You had something, Chris? You just had your hand up. All right. All right. Good questions. That's what we're here for. So that's why we wanted to have the community of Shabbat to really focus on, if anybody got any questions or anything, because then it'll help your understanding as we, see all them lessons I'll be putting. Oh, yes. All those lessons I'll be putting out. You see what I'm talking about.
Quick question. In the New Testament, did Paul sometimes entertain Greek and Grecian?
Let me think. Paul.
Sometimes he used Greek or
Paul.
Only
time I can think of the word Grecian really being used is when they had a division of the food in Acts, when they were talking about how they had to call forth Stephen and the other ones to distribute food, because there was an issue between the Grecians and the Israelites, or the native-born Israelites that never lost their culture versus the Israelites who lost their culture and were Hellenized. That's the one. Then it was also used against Paul, because when Paul came down to Jerusalem, they said that the Grecians were trying to kill him. When he was preached, they didn't like him. So they had to get him out. That's the only 2 places. I know sometimes people say that the northern tribe are like Hellenized Israelites. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But I feel like, which we'll go through some today, I feel like they were truly, descendants from Greeks or, Goyim, from Gentiles. That's what I feel like. That's what I truly, because once you start reading the scripture like Cornelius, right? Like, what was the big deal about Cornelius? If he was already a Hellenized Israelite, why did they make that story a big deal, right? Like, even Peter didn't want to be around them because he said other people wouldn't like the fact that he was there. Why would he like, and early on in the story, you see they were together with the Grecians. So why would he, you know what I'm saying? Just don't make sense. So we know that a lot of those people had to be Israelites. You got something? Okay, thought Isaiah had a question. All right, any other question? I ain't trying to rush. I always can stop in the middle of the lesson, no problem. And then, do you know why Paul was called a leader of the Nazarenes versus a Christian? So remember they said, they thought he was a Nazarene, said you are from the sect of the Nazarenes. They were calling him a sect of the Nazarenes, and they weren't calling him a Christian. So what is a sect of the Nazarenes, right? Who was calling him that? That's important. Because the Israelites, just call them Israelites for now, they were the ones that were persecuting him. He said they are the ones that say he's the sect from the Nazarenes. So they associated him to the Nazarene. So who's the Nazarene? Well, that's the Rechabites. Oh, Nazareth, the vow of the Nazarene. So that's the vow. Anybody can do that. But yeah, that's good. That's the vow that Paul even took, some people say. We'll get to that. That's today's lesson. All right? And how do they differ from the Ebionites and the other? Anybody heard of the Ebionites? Or the Nazarenes? Anybody heard of that? So that's why it's important to teach this, because a lot of people think that, you know, you have the play that they used to do at Easter with all the people dressed up, you know, like the disciples and stuff. And then they think after that, it just went straight to Roman Catholicism, right? In Roman Catholicism, you got the friars and stuff with the hair shades off the top, friar tuck. You're like, where did that come from, right? You get the popes and stuff like that. Like, that's not in the Bible. But there's a transition that happened that's very important to understand, because a lot of people miss that history between the disciples to where we are today, right? If you miss that, you won't understand why we're doing the customs and stuff that we are in the light of the Messiah, like the disciples did, right? And what Christians did was not in light of the Messiah, right? They mixed stuff in with other stuff, all right? All right, so let me ask you, do you know different nations of people who converted to be a part of Israel before the Messiah was born, but never will replace Israel? So y'all know about the people who were converted to being Israelites before? What's that? Well, we talked a little bit about that. So that's one of the groups. The Edomites could actually, in 3 generations, become an Edomite, and that's what you're probably talking about when they convert.
I'm talking about
Oh, that's later. Yeah, that's later Edomites. I thought you were talking about real Edomite, like back in the day Edomites. But Khazars were actually Russian. So really, if you look at them, if they're Russian, they're really more European than Shemitic. So, yeah. So, but that is a conversion. That was after the Messiah, though. But before the Messiah, we talked a little bit about this. I think Rechabites. That's what we talked a little bit about. Anybody know Jael? Ever heard that Bible? Jael? The woman that took the peg and put it through the man's head, gave him some milk. She was not an Israelite. She was a daughter of Hobab. Anybody know who Hobab is? Hobab was the brother of Zipporah. So remember Moses, Jethro married Zipporah, and Hobab was the one that showed him how to get through the desert. And the deal was, if he showed him, then he'll have the Kenites, which is people called the Kenites, that lived among Judah. So they were never part of Judah, even though they lived among Judah. So that's important to understand that too in history. But then you also have there's some other people who weren't Israelites. Well, I mean, Zipporah. Zipporah wasn't an Israelite, right? What was Zipporah? Anybody know? She was called an Ethiopian. Midianite. So who are the Midianites? Anybody know? Not the Medes and Persians, but think about who was Midian. Anybody know? So Abraham had how many wives? Well, okay. Well, we can say 3. We could say 3. Well, who were the 2? Let's talk about that. Who was the 2? Sarah, Hagar, and who's the other person? He married somebody else. Keturah. Anybody heard of Keturah? Keturah was after his wife died, he married Keturah, another woman, and she had other children. One of those children were called Midian. So they became the Midianites. So remember, she knew how to circumcise. How did she know how to circumcise? To save her husband, because he didn't save, Moses didn't circumcise his baby, and y'all was getting ready to kill him. And she came in and circumcised and said, something about your God is a blood, something about blood or something. But how did she know how to circumcise? Because she was a Midianite, right? And all Abraham's children had to be circumcised, right? So that went throughout all those generations. So, the Midianites were actually Hebrews that lived among, the enemies of the Israelites are really Shemitic people. People act like it's Japhetic, it's European. It's really the Shemitic people, because those are the people who are the Edomites. Those are the people who are the, Moabites, the Ammonites. Where did the Moabite and Ammonites come from? Lot, the brother, the nephew of Abraham, were the enemies of the Israelites. So you can see that, right? So a lot of people trying to talk about all this other stuff. Look, we really need to read the Bible, right? Because we're looking at all these other enemies. It said when we get back to the land in Isaiah 11, it said we're going to fight Shemites. So we got to really understand those. This is the reason why I do this, right? To kind of make sure you're thinking around the right lines, because a lot of times we told stuff. And I was like that too as a Christian. minister, you told stuff, and you just take it in, and it stays with you from a child all the way into, nothing breaks that off until somebody challenges you. So that's the reason why I'm always open to talk to young people, old people, because sometimes our train of thinking has been forced that way, right? And we just take it as knowledge, right? I think there's some people going around saying different quotes, and it challenges people because they say, is this really a biblical quote? Like, God only helped those who help themselves. Is that in the Bible? No. Right. A lot of people learned that that was not in the Bible. But back in the day, people used to say all that, right? Clean as next to godliness. Yeah, that's enough. There's something similar to that. But yeah, that actually doesn't come from straight quote from the Bible. So, all right. So let me see. So I get a little bit time. I'm going to go through some of this with the Nazarenes. And if you got questions, let me know. And if when we run out of time, we run out of time. All right. And then I can pick it up another time if we need to. All right, so next. So this is the little map I made, a little images and stuff to help people to understand the timeline of the Bible. And that helps out a lot. So from the time Moses came, and then you have Solomon. So remember we talked about Solomon's temple. He's the one that actually built the temple. And after him, that's when the kingdom separated, right? And then after they came back from captivity, from Babylon, Zerubbabel's temple, that's when they built the second temple. So sometimes you hear people say Second Temple period Judaism. That's what a lot of our Israelite people are doing, and it's not biblical. It's really what Yahushua was calling out. He was rebuking them. That's the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So when you hear Second Temple period Judaism, that's where that comes from. Like we talked about cedar plates and stuff like that. There's some paganism that came in earlier, way before Romans and stuff came in. So it came from Babylon, the month of Tammuz. We talked about that, right, during Easter. And then after that, right, you don't hear anything about Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. You hear nothing about that in the Old Testament, right, in the Tanakh. You don't hear about that until the Brit Hadashah. So where do they come from, right? In Matthew, they just pop out of nowhere. So it was that time in between, like I was saying, Hanukkah time, that's when they start popping up. But it's not in our Bible unless you read like Maccabees or something like that. You start hearing divisions between the Israelite, the sellout Israelites, the ones that was becoming Grecians, right? The ones that were being Hellenized. That's the reason why we don't do frats and sororities, because that's being Hellenized. That's what was going on during that time, right? They were basically taking them from their culture and mixing them with the Greek culture. So that's when we get to Hanukkah, right? The revolt. And then in the Brit Hadashah, we get the Herod's temple. So that's when Herod comes. That's the whole thing about, most Christians say the Christmas story and, King Herod tried to kill all the babies. And then we know Yahushua lived and he died. He was sacrificed on the cross. And then after him came his followers called the Nazarenes. And as the Nazarenes were coming, the Christians were also developing. So the Nazarenes were the Israelites, like the disciples, who now, like the book of Hebrews, right? The book of Hebrews is written to who? Hebrews. And what are they doing in Hebrews? He's explaining to the Hebrews who the Messiah is, right? So they're basically trying to get an understanding. So you're hearing a lot, but at the same time, the Gentiles are also accepting him too, right? You hear God-fearers, right? Proselytes, those who that's actually in the Tanakh. Those who were Gentiles who actually decided to follow the Israelites, they would get circumcised and then they would be treated as natural born. That's what the scripture says, right? So that's why we accept Gentiles, whoever Yah says to receive, we receive. So that was even a Brit Hadashah, a Tanakh thing. Way before even the Messiah even came, they were already doing that. So, but then we get to the Council of Jerusalem. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we get 50 AD, the Israelites, Romans kick out the Israelites. 70 AD, what happened in 70 AD? The temple was destroyed and they ran away. So that's the scripture I read today. That was the first scripture when he talks about this event that was going to happen to spread the people, scatter us throughout the nations. And then you have, anybody heard of Masada? No? Masada is, yes? You heard of Masada? Can you tell us what Masada is? Little scripture.
No, but I heard.
You heard of it. Okay, no problem. No problem. Masada is basically the hill they actually were running around killing all the Israelites. After they destroyed the temple, they were trying to kill all the, if you heard of the group Sakari, there's a camp called Sakari. They're named after the group that was actually fighting against the Romans during that time, right? They had little daggers. They would kill the Roman officials as they, in the crowds and hide. And that was called like the special rebellious group. So that's why they got the name after them. or took the name after them. And then in Masada, that was the last stronghold. And the Romans basically end up going up there. And when they went up there to kill them, they had already killed themselves. And actually scientists had went there and found like some of the scalps and stuff where they killed themselves, and they found all kind of hair up there, like plaits and braided and stuff like that. And looked at their skull, and it was dosicolophallic. So that's what the African skulls are, a certain type of skull. And that's what they said their skulls were at this place called Masada. So look it up. It's very interesting. And then we get the 1st century. This is when everything changes, right? Church fathers, everybody heard the church fathers' names and stuff here. People talking about church fathers and Christianity. That's when it changed. And then that's when the revolt happened. And we'll talk a little bit about this just to save some time. And then finally, in 740 AD, that's the King of Khazars. So that's all this other stuff happened way before that. So a lot of times people think that happened early. No, that was late. That was way late. So when we talking about like the Talmud, I don't believe in the Talmud. But that was our people. That wasn't the Khazars. They continued the tradition of that. But it was our people that was getting called out by the Messiah saying, you follow the traditions of men, right? That's what he's talking about. He's talking about because, during that time, he hadn't even died yet, right? So there was no such thing as a Christian because he hadn't even died. But why is he calling out the people for their traditions when he's also an Israelite? Because they had already adopted Babylonian traditions. So that's why I'm real hesitant about bringing a lot of Judaism stuff into us. So let's just go by the Bible and slowly understand what all that other stuff means, right? All right, so next slide. So the Nazarenes versus the Christian, all right? So going back to the scripture, next slide. So we get to Luke 21. So this is what I read earlier, right? It said later on in the highlighted section, it says, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, right? That's important. And then in verse 24, this is what we were talking about earlier, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. So what people after 70 AD was taken into all nations as slaves? Us, yes, Israelites. We're the only people throughout all the world that our people as Bantu people have been enslaved throughout all the four corners. Only people. So we're the only ones that match this, right? And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So what does that mean? When is this time of the Gentiles going to be fulfilled? What does that mean, right? So we got to understand what that means, right? Even from the Israelis that they're talking about it today, they're talking about goyim. Like, why are they talking about goyim? That's why I tell people, you got to understand what they're talking about. If you go in their books, they're calling President Trump an Edomite. They say that Rome and America is Amalek. You got to understand what they're saying. They're talking about basically America needs to be destroyed. And even like European, they're against Europeans. So they're more worse against them than they are against us. And they say this. But a lot of people don't understand the language and what they're talking about. But if you start reading a book called The King's Torah, they're talking about going and killing more Europeans than us. So it's like, why are they saying that? People don't know this, know this stuff. But anyway, because they don't consider themselves, as convenient. Some of them will consider themselves, what was that? Whoopi Goldberg, when she said the Jews are white, and she got in all that trouble, right? But then some of them say Jews are white. So what does that mean? You know what I'm saying? Why is it accepted sometimes and other times? Because it's, it's a society. There's a video, a Jewish man and a black man is talking, and they're talking all through that, right? So it's just being frank. And so it's important to understand what these things mean and what terms. You go to Israel, some of them, they'll say that they're black. They don't look nothing like what we call white would be considered. Well, they say they're black over in Israel. We're like, what? Look like an Italian, like a darker skinned white person, right? And they say that they are black. But you got to understand what they're talking about, right? So it's very important not to look at stuff from an American lens, a Western lens. We're talking about Israel. Is Israel in the West? No. Where it's part of the East, right? It's an Eastern religion. It was transferred to the West by the Romans. So we got to understand the difference. So that's the difference between the Christians and Nazarenes.
Oh, is that, so you're saying that the Gentiles and Israelis today, how they, before 1948, I guess, or they were practicing some form of Judaism in that region, in Ukraine or...
Oh yeah, Khazars and stuff. Yeah, though. Yes. So like 700 AD, around that time, that's when the Moors and the Christians were fighting a lot. So the story is that the King Khazaria was right there where the territories of the Moors, the Muslims and the Christians were about to fight. It's like that country in between. So the story is they basically told the king, I think it's Bulan, saying, choose what side you're going to be on. You're a Christian or you're going to be a Muslim. So he said, give me some time. He said, let me interview everybody. And he interviewed the Muslims. He's like, you're a Christian? He's like, And he's like, wait a minute, smart man. What can I be that basically won't make me be on one side or the other? So he interviewed somebody who was a Jew, right? And he said, basically the guy was like, hey, I'm basically, both religions are based upon Judaism. So that way, you don't have to go either way. So he converted his whole kingdom to be, Judaism, based on Judean religion. So he converted. But there was converts before that, way before, even in the Bible. During the time of Queen Esther, it says that when the Mordecai and them basically were able to go and fight the other people, it said that even the people in India converted to being a Jew. That's how the scripture says, that they converted. So they were converts way back then. But the issue is that, during that period in time, that's like 700 AD. We're way after the Messiah and all the rabbinical stuff. So like we can even find, as African American, my DNA, some reasons in Russia. And I'm like, what's Russia got to do with that? What? Russia wasn't even part of the slave trade. So I'm like, what's Russia doing? And it's a whole bunch of my cousins. They got Russian DNA. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So I'm trying to figure, but I wonder is that even some of the Israelites actually went to Russia. And some people even talk about how they end up coming to America during the ice bridge. But that's a whole nother story. And I know I'm probably make internet on fire. As soon as I say that, YouTube people already talking about, we're not African Americans. Don't say African Americans. So I kind of know what you're talking about. All right? So don't get me on YouTube. Having the whole thing messed up. So that's what I think happened. Because there are some black Russians too.
When you say convert though to Judaism, do you mean like during that? Remember you said like after the temple, the second temple period,
After the second temple period,
That's when they began to bring that oral tradition. They basically got away from what the Torah was saying.
Right, they're blending. That's still our people though.
Okay.
Our people still mixing the beliefs. So after, before 70 AD, when the first temple fell, the Solomon temple fell. You remember we were taken to Babylon. And then we went to Persia, the Queen Esther story, right? And then they came back to build the wall. Go back up to the timeline. So the first temple was destroyed, right? Our people were taken to Babylonia, and then we came back and rebuilt Zerubbabel's temple. So this is the period where they call Second Temple period, right? Because now the months has changed. So what's the first month in the Hebrew calendar? What's Nisan? It's the first month, but why some people call it Abib and some people call it Nisan? Because when they came back, they brought the Babylonian calendar with them. So that's why they have Tammuz. Look up, just Google on your phone, the month of Tammuz. Tammuz is a false god in the Bible. Why would you name, as Israelites, a month after a false god? So in the Bible, in Ezekiel, it said the women were weeping for Tammuz. He said, this is a great abomination. So why would you have, on some Jewish calendars, they actually, I'm trying to correct my terminology. I don't want to get kicked off of YouTube. Judaism, I won't say Jewish, because some Jewish people are atheists. A good number of Jewish people in Israel are atheists. They don't even believe in the Bible, but they still do the custom. So just think about it over here in America. A lot of people, they say they celebrate Christmas, but they could be atheists. Right? So it's the same thing, right? So during that period, they were basically converting, and then that's when you start seeing Yah was in Ezekiel, he's talking about the 70 elders and he's chastising them, saying, y'all are wrong. Y'all basically led your people astray and all that stuff. And then you see Yahusha quoting from the same scripture from Isaiah saying, you follow the traditions of men. That's a direct quote from the Tanakh. That he's calling out the people even then. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, calling them wolves and vipers and all kind of stuff. That's that Second Temple period stuff.
I just want to say that's why circumcision in part is way more important. Whether they're natural born or Gentiles, when they convert, they start bringing all that paganism, Babylonian stuff in, because they're not circumcised, on the heart. So
Circumcising the heart. That's the part. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. It was our people. That's what I'm saying. We all been talking about other people. It's really our people that was doing all that, you know. And then we converted other people to do it. So let's make it even worse. And now people don't even know what the original stuff is, right? Like we get all kind of confusion. So good question. Thank you, Aaron. All right. So next. All right. So that's what is happening now. This is what Yahushua said was going to happen. He said that Jerusalem basically is going to get circled around, and when that happened, run to the mountains, right? So when did this happen, right? So a lot of people look at this prophecy and you have to see it. Is this a future prophecy, like our future? Or was it a future prophecy to the Israelites living then? Whose future was it? So, 70 AD hadn't happened yet, right? So he's telling these people to flee to the mountains. He said that people will be captured by the sword and to all nations. Are we going to be captured by the sword into all nations now? That already happened to us, right? That's the reason why we're here. So there's parts of these prophecies that's in the past, but there's still parts of it that's in our future. Because we're talking about the Messiah coming down on the cloud, the Son of Man coming. That hasn't happened yet, unless y'all tell me. Because if it did, I'm scared. I missed the ride, right? So we got to actually be able to understand by, looking at the other scriptures as well. Let me see what time it is. All right. And I know I'm not going to get through all this, but we'll get through the core. All right. So next. So when we talk about the Nazarenes, right, in the first century Christians, right, we can see that there was some different terminology used in the Bible. And in Matthew 2, there's a prophecy saying he came and dwelt in a city called what? Nazareth. That might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a what? Nazareth. So Yahushua was called a what? Nazareth. So his followers were called what? Right, so that's what we get. The followers, early Israelite followers of the Nazarene were called the Nazarenes. All right? So in Acts 11, we can see verse 26, and it says, when he had found him, he brought him into where? And it came to pass that a whole year they assembled themselves with the church and taught much people, and the disciples were called what? First where? Antioch. So this is what chapter? So what happened to the first 10 chapters? What were they called? People of the way, believers of the way, Nazarenes. That's what they were called. Until this period. And why was Antioch important? What happened in Antioch? Period. Anybody know Antioch? What you say?
The Holy Spirit came.
Oh, well, that was like Jerusalem. But I'm saying, this is when they went to Antioch, right? So that's when the first Gentile churches start happening. Yeah. So they're basically understanding it from their point of view. So why do they call them Christians? Why didn't they just keep on calling them Nazarenes? There's a reason, right? So in verse 24, it says, and after verses 1 and 5, it says, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders, and when a certain name named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. So this is the priest and the elder. This is an Israelite, right? For we have found this man a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout all the world, a ringleader of the sect of the what? He didn't say Christian, right? He said Nazarenes. All right? Yeah.
So, I guess in the original text, does it say Christian?
When we say original
When I
text.
say, I know it was translated to Greek.
Uh-huh.
I guess in Greek, it wouldn't be Christian, right?
It'll be Christos or something like that.
Okay.
It'll be Christ because the word Messiah means the anointed one.
Okay.
Christ in Greek, Christos mean the anointed one. They basically translated the word.
Okay.
So that's how they got that word. Now, they wouldn't be called, like among the Israelites, they would never call him Christ.
Right.
They will call him Messiah, Mashiach. So anytime you hear him called Christ, that's because the Gentiles start referring to him to the Greek term. But it was always Messiah, all the way up to that. So Peter, when you hear that word, we'll talk, I think that's in here. Yeah. When it talks about the last one, yet if any man suffer as a Christian, right, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify Yah on this behalf. That's important, right? So this is Peter. Why would you be ashamed to be called a Christian? Don't make sense, right? Like, but basically the Mason, the Israelites were being referred to like the Greeks. They were making association. So he said, if they're making an association, what a big deal. That's fine. You still connected to Yah. But he won't call them Christians, right? He basically, and then even Peter had an interpreter that's writing them, that what you're saying, right? Writing stuff to people that were Hellenized and Greeks, so they couldn't speak Hebrew. So that's the reason why he's converting it to these languages, right? So really it would be Messianic, early beliefs would be Messianic. Right. Later, they start falling on the Christian term. Good question. So same thing with the others too. So the Israelites who were not believers of the Messiah was calling the followers, the disciples, Nazarenes, right? And when they went to the Gentile lands, they were calling them Christians. That's where we're getting at, okay? The name changes, right? And then Agrippa, he was saying unto Paul, because Agrippa, he was a Edomite / Israelite, right? Descendant of Herod. He said, almost persuaded me to be a Christian. So he's still looking at a term outside of the Israelites, right? Being the king. All right, so let's go to the next one. And this is why it's important. So we say if this is a future prophecy, just this section. Now, some of Luke is future, but this section right here, he said, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, right? So in the future, right, we do know Jerusalem will have circled with the armies, right? It said that they're going to attack Jerusalem. But in 70 AD, did they have Romans circle Jerusalem? Yes, because they burned down the temple. So we got, similarities on both. But he says, when you see this, flee to the mountains, right? And he says, let them which are in the midst depart out, and let not them are in the countries enter therein, because these are the days of vengeance. So who is receiving the vengeance of Jerusalem? So who's the one that's receiving the vengeance?
The Jews, right?
The Israelites, right? So in the future, when we get taken back to Israel, are we going to be receiving vengeance? No. So we know that this is talking about what? 70 AD. This portion, just this portion, right? So that's important. So what happened when he's basically prophesying to his disciples that's living there about what's going to happen in their future? It doesn't mean our future every time. So a lot of people will take some of those scriptures and act like it's all our future, and it's not, you'll hear it on TV and all, they'll confuse the mess out of you if you go based upon them. And because he's taking out vengeance because they're not doing right. Just like he did on the northern tribe, he's doing on the southern tribe. He did it one time with the Babylonians, they still didn't do right. So now he's basically taking the vengeance out on the rest of, 70 AD for the final time. All right? And that's why they're led away captives until the times of the Gentiles. So that's important. Next, this is just something to say. So the Telluride Temple, y'all heard me teach about this before. Anybody don't know about this? Anybody not know about this? Okay. Telluride Temple. So there's still a temple standing in Israel. They count it as a temple. So we know that the Messiah said about the temple, not one stone will be left upon another. So we know it shouldn't be no temple there, right? Right. So what is this temple? And this temple, I think in the 40s, it just rained and it started popping out of nowhere. So they're like, what is this, right? And it's shaped the same way as a temple. It has the Holy of Holies and everything else around it, right? And they had actually ancient Paleo-Hebrew writing tablets around it too, artifacts. So the guy who can actually read this is an African-American. He was the first person to translate Paleo-Hebrew into English, an African-American. And he says that he was here before slavery, his family, and they're Native Americans. That's why I said that's going to take you down a rabbit hole there. but he actually lives in Israel now. And he basically showed his family's artifacts and showed that black people should be living in Israel. So now you hear like the Dimona Israelites, the ones that live in Israel by the nuclear plant, that's one of the reasons they were accepted to live there, because of the artifacts and, his language and some of the history of the other people that showed proof. And they speak the ancient language. That's why I'm trying to get us to speak the ancient, because we can actually read those artifacts. All right, but this temple just popped out of nowhere. And it's important because before that. So in the last days, will there be a third temple built? I hear no and yes. No, yes. So, Well, that's important. Some people say it's Ezekiel's temple. There's some issues with that, right? Because it talks about the man would have the sacrifice. He would have to give the sacrifice for himself and others. Why would Yahushua have to give a sacrifice for himself when he was sinless? Let you know something going on there. And then he said he would have descendants that he would give land to. Yahushua didn't have no family, right? Unless you're talking about that, what's that, Da Vinci Code kind of craziness. Don't believe that crazy Gnostic stuff. But remember, it says that the son of perdition will be sit on the throne, stand in the temple and proclaim himself as God. So there is a temple going to be built, but it shouldn't be one that's going to be us to honor and look towards in a good way. But the Bible does says that the Messiah will come back, and he will come to what? Is he coming back to a temple? Where is he coming back, the Messiah? To the mountain, Mount Zion. And what was going to be rebuilt there? Anybody, was it a temple? He's going to live in the structure. Tabernacle. My wife already know, yeah? Go ahead and hit the thing. So these scriptures right here in Isaiah 16:5, and in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of what? So is the tabernacle, did David build the temple? Who built the temple? The son. What did David build? The tabernacle of David. So he built a shelter before they built the Solomon's temple to hide, to put the ark in, not hide, to place the ark. It was called the tabernacle of David. Some people believe what we just saw in Telluride is the tabernacle of David. Why would they? Some people say that because it says in Amos 9:11, in that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, saying that it's still around, it's just in ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. And in Acts 15, it basically says the same verse. It's basically quoting. So it shows you that had not yet been fulfilled, right? In the Brit Hadashah. All right. So I'm gonna go through this real quick. Yeah, go through this real quick. Next slide. So this is the Hanukkah period. All right. This is all that happened in Hanukkah. It's in the Bible. People act like, the Greek kingdom and what happened in Hanukkah is not in the Bible. It is in the Bible. Daniel basically goes through Hanukkah in a quick way, but it still talks about it, right? So the scripture talks about a mighty king will arise and rule with great authority and do as is pleased. Everybody heard of Alexander the Great? All right. But as soon as he has risen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendant, nor according to toward his authority, which he wielded for his sovereignty, will be rooted and given to others besides him. So that's exactly when Alexander the Great died. He didn't have no heir. It went among a lot of people, and the remaining 4 after all these wars that actually happened were these 4. All right. So next. So same thing is basically in Daniel 8. It says the male goat, actually Alexander's father's symbol was a goat. That's amazing. It's on the coin. But it says, then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and his place came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. So these are the 4 generals, same 4 generals, right, that came up after Alexander died. After that, there was a big war, and everybody was trying to get places. So if you go through Daniel 11, it's amazing, really, but we won't do that today. So next slide. So this is a good picture of how the division eventually happened. And you have the Seleucus, he was the big one. Then you have Ptolemy, then you have Licinius and Cassander. Seleucus beat the other 2, so that's why it looks kind of orange. And in the end, it was just 2 emperors, the king of the north and the king of the south. You ever heard that in scripture? The king of the north will do this, and the king of the south. That's all in Daniel. It talks about the king of the north and the king of the south. That's what's happening, is that these 2 kingdoms were fighting each other during that period of time. And it's so accurate of the battles and stuff that most secular historians try to say that Daniel wrote it after the fact, that he wrote history. He wasn't writing like a prophet. He was writing, he was lying because everything is so exact. So if you look up the Syrian wars in Daniel 11, it's about just exactly goes through the whole story of history. It's amazing when you actually look at it. All right. So next one. So let me see. Okay. So Seleucus won the territory of Syria, and he basically honored his father and his son by naming it Antioch. That's where the name Antioch comes from, the Greek king that basically took over Syria. It's nothing about the Hebrews, right? So that's why they were Gentiles there living in Antioch. That was one that he named a lot of different places Antioch. A lot of his capitals were called Antioch, right? And that's important because, next slide, there's Seraphus Christos. He was one of the gods worshipped at Antioch. So when they say they were first called Christians, where? Why were you called Christian there? And then I was in seminary and they told me that was a derogatory name they were calling. So why would that be a derogatory name? Right? Because number one, you got the Romans. The Romans defeated the Greeks, right? So they didn't speak Greek. They spoke their language, some kind of Italian language, right? So they heard certain things and they were basically trying to refer to certain things like, bless you, refer to them like they were calling them, but it wasn't the same. Now, the word Christos, like he was saying, is actually Greek word, and it was, even referred to as the anointed one a long time ago. But the Romans didn't understand that, right? So a lot of times they were thinking they were calling the certain god Christos. It's Seraphus Christos, right? So this is from the Got Questions. This is a Christian website that says this. Got Questions is a Christian website. But it says the origin of Seraphus worship is rooted in political expediency. Ptolemy the First, that's the king of the south that basically was over Egypt, one of the generals who took over the Greek Empire after Alexander's death. That's right, what I just said, right? Ruled Egypt 323 BC to 282 BC, wanting to reunite Egyptian and Greek segment of the populace under his rule. But Ptolemy created a new deity that combined the elements of the Egyptian and Greek culture. So he started with Osiris, the Egyptian god of the underworld, and added the worship of Apis, the sacred Egyptian bull. So that you see the bull with the little horns, and sometimes you see a disc. I think that's a sign of medicine or something. There's a company that took on, what's that company out there where y'all stay? Don't they have a bull? Yeah, there we go, right there. So it says, Ptolemy then Hellenized the appearance of his new Osiris Apis god. The Greeks wanted their god to look like people without heads. The result was Seraphus, a god with long hair and a full beard, who was the god of the afterlife, healing fertility. Looks like Zeus, right? The cult of the composite god Seraphus was never that popular in Egypt itself, but it later spread to other parts of the Roman Empire, where Seraphus was also known as the patron god of sailors, the sun god, that's very important, sun god, and even a replacement of Zeus, the chief god. So that's how high he actually went. And why this is important, so next, this is where we start mixing Christianity and Nazarene. So this is actually in the Vatican, under the necropolis, and it's basically Christ as the Son, S-U-N. So they mix Sol Invictus with the Messiah, and they have this picture there. And this was the time right before Constantine came and built the church and had the Nicene Council and basically said what was what. He worshiped Mithra, which was the sun god as well. So they're mixing two different paganism in the Bible. So that's how we get a lot of the Christianity that was actually done in the Nicene Council. So it gets worse than that too. But he says right there, this is not my saying, right? This is coming straight off the Wikipedia page for this picture. But it says that the necropolis, that's the underground graveyard pagan thing that they built the church on for some strange reason. Mosaic of the Vatican, Greatos, under St. Peter's Basilica on the ceiling of the tomb of the Julie, representation of Christ as the sun god, Helios, or Sol Invictus, riding in his chariot, right? Dated to the 3rd century AD. Early Christian and pagan beliefs are combined in this 3rd century mosaic of Christ as the sun god. So this is 3rd century. When was the Council of Nicaea? 325 AD. That's when they basically put the stamp on Christianity, right? So all this was going on, this pagan mixing of paganism, European gods with the Bible, basically. Separate from the Nazarenes that were disciples, holding the Israelite customs, but still recognizing the Messiah. You see the difference? There's a big difference between a Nazarene, an Israelite who believed in the Messiah, versus somebody who mixed the Bible with the sun, with paganism. So that's why we get Easter, right? A lot, Easter and Valentine, all these pagan holidays that got mixed in with the Bible. That's basically what happened, right? So Easter is the name of a false goddess. Why did they name Easter Easter? It's based upon a German European goddess. All right, so next. So this is St. Peter's Basilica, right? You just look up that. Why? What is this? What is that? That's an obelisk. That's an Egyptian male fertility for young ears. If you know what that is, it's the male, So that's what that is. Why would they have that in a Christian place? So why would we have that in Washington, D.C.? It's Egyptian for male, basically the god got killed, got cut up in pieces. The god basically, the wife pulled all the pieces together except that one piece. Y'all know what I'm talking about, older ears. So that's what that's a sign of. So why is that there? Why is the Washington Monument based upon that? He was a Mason, right? Abraham Lincoln Memorial is a sign of a man sitting him in a chair. Seems like the Washington Monument will make George Washington, right? But that's what they put up. So, but why is that in Rome? Why is that in the Christian place, right? So that gets worse because the necropolis that sits under it, next. This is necropolis. So this is the graveyard, the pagan graveyard they built the church on top of, that Constantine had the church built on top of. He was a worshiper of Mithra, the sun god, right? So next, this is St. Peter's Basilica.info, right? You can go right there yourself. And then if you start looking at you can't hardly see it, but my wife, what does that say you? Lucifer. Why do they have a chamber of Lucifer under the Vatican? Then they also have Christos Sol, as in that picture that you found, which we showed earlier, Christ as the sun god. So something going on strange, right? And they'll say that Lucifer is the morning light and all the light bearer. Like, wait a minute, that's not, they try to make it like, oh, it's not what you think. But in the Basilica, they got a sign of Lucifer being defeated by the Messiah or something. So how can you have it, how can you have two different meanings of the same thing? So next, and that's I had to hide some there, but that's the picture of what was had as in the thing for Lucifer. Isn't that very similar? Him riding on this horse, right? Very similar to the next picture. I think I put it in there. Next slide. Oh, I didn't put it in there. But isn't that very similar to what we saw earlier about Christ on the sun? He was riding on the horse as Sol Invictus, the sun god, S-U-N God. So guess what Sol Invictus, when is his birthday? Why would they celebrate the Messiah's birthday on December 25th with that same sun god? Sol Invictus. Sunday worship, Sol Invictus. So this is why we don't do these things, right? That's why we're Messianic. We follow by the Bible and do the Sabbath on the Saturday instead on the Sunday that Constantine moved as a sun worshiper, sun god worshiper. He said he saw the shield of Christ and all that, but a lot of people say that was a story that came later. All right, so real quick, I'll go through this because I talked about the council. I don't want to leave you hanging. But this is a book that's good to get. Jewish Christianity, call it Jewish Christianity in the early church. They start talking about the differences, right? So next slide. And they start talking about there was other Messianic groups that actually came out of that, the Corinthians, the Ebionites, the Nazarenes, and the Ecclesiastites. Anyway, a lot of people don't talk about except the middle two. Those are the main two. People were followers of the Messiah, and they were basically saying that they were Jewish Christians. They were Israelites that start taking on the belief of the Messiah. But they were totally different. One group rejected Paul. One group accepted Paul's letter. Don't you hear that in our community? Some people are like, I don't believe in Paul's letters. Some people say, oh, I believe in it. Some people believe that Yahushua was born by Joseph, that he was actually his blood son. And the other side believed that he was from Mary. Don't you hear that debate in our community? A lot of people debate about that. And then you have some people say that you're supposed to be vegan, and the other one says you're not. Don't you hear that debate in our community? So that's the difference between the Ebionites and the Nazarenes that was going on. Both of them preserved the laws and statutes and kept the Sabbath, but the Nazarenes did it in the light of the Messiah, right? So you can see where those divisions start going. So if you start studying that, you will start understanding what was going on. But then they had some very strange beliefs at the bottom. They rejected eating meat. Last Supper, Yahushua questioned about eating meat, and Peter was a vegetarian, they try to say. And the other ones believe like most, us. So that's the reason why sometimes I push back on some stuff, because I'm like, yeah, you got to know the difference between the Nazarene and Ebionite to understand where you're getting some of those customs from. All right, so the last part I'll talk about is the council, and that way I don't leave you hanging. All right, so next, so this is, you can see the timeline. So basically where we are is the Nazarene. We were just even right here. All that has happened is just right here. We ain't even talk about all the other stuff that happened afterwards, right? So the Nazarenes basically, really, let me see, 70 AD, we're really right around this period, I would say. So that's where you get the early church fathers and why all of them are mostly European, right? How do you turn being from an Israelite faith and now you're in Rome? Like, what happened? How did the power switch from Jerusalem to Rome, to the Vatican? It lets you know something happened. And that's why I went to seminary and they said they couldn't teach it. I said, what? They didn't teach it. How you don't teach that? They'll start teaching you right here from the early church fathers. They'll talk about Acts and they go straight here. They'll skip over all this other history it's good, very important to learn. All right. Next. So this is the councils of Jerusalem. So there was 2 councils. Most people talk about the first, but they won't talk about the second. So in Acts 15, it says, therefore, it is my judgment that we do not trouble those who are turning to Yah from among the Gentiles. So now Gentiles are being received, right? It says, but that we write to them that they abstain from the things condemned, contaminated by idols, and from fornication, and what was strangled, and from blood, right? So those are the things that they said that the Gentiles just had to do, those 4 things, because they didn't have the Bible, right? They didn't have the book. They didn't have stuff like it was expensive to make a Bible. So he said, these are the 4 things if they convert in their heart and they want to follow Yahushua, right? They have to know these 4 things. So they didn't grow up on the Bible and Torah and all that. They didn't know any of that. So he said, at least these are the 4 things they had to learn, not to abstain from idols, from fornication, from eating things strangled, and from drinking blood, anything with blood, right? That's why I always feel like a lot of our people like well done stuff, right? Like burn it, like burn it. But verse 21 says, for Moses from ancient generations has in every city those who preach him, since he is read in the synagogues every Sabbath. So he said, even though they don't know but these 4 things, eventually they'll get the rest by coming to the Shabbat services, right? That they'll learn more, right, as part of those Shabbats. Then it seems good to the apostle and the elders with the whole church to choose men from among them to send to where? Antioch, with Paul and Barnabas. So you see why Paul is, talking in all these long letters and going back and forth, and because he had a lot to explain to a lot of different communities. That's why, I think people read Paul wrong, at least in our group. They're like, I'm going to reject Paul. I'm like, you don't truly understand what Paul was doing. But he's also human. He was human, right? Just like the rest of them. But it says, and Barnabas, Judas called Barsabas, and Silas, leading men among the brethren, and they sent this letter by them, the apostles and the brethren who are elders, to the brethren in Antioch and Syria. That's where I told you Seleucus ruled, right? That Greek general. He was the person who established Antioch, and he was the Syrian Greek general that took over that place. And Cilicia, who are from the who? Gentiles. So this is about Gentiles. Has nothing to do with Israelites. Greetings. He's writing to the Gentiles. For it seemed good for the Ruach HaKodesh and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these essentials. He said these are the essential things. To abstain from idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from fornication. That's the essentials, he said. That's what they decided on, right? But are these things commandments? Can you worship idols? Can you eat things in blood? Isn't that in the law? Can you eat, is in the law don't eat strangled animals in the law? How about fornication? Is that in the law? So they basically teaching the law, right? Telling these Gentiles to keep these first 4 laws and they'll go good. So people saying that Gentiles don't keep the law. You just told them to keep 4 laws. Yes.
So like when you say about the from the blood, would that be like the same thing like transfusions?
Somebody gave me with a crock pot. I'm like, I don't know about all that cooking stuff. I'm like, I don't know. Transfusions. We're not eating the blood.
Right.
So transfusion, that's like Jehovah's Witness, right? I know Jehovah's Witness don't believe in blood transfusions,
Right.
but
I was just wondering.
yeah, I don't know of any law that says don't take transfusions, but it's interesting because he said life is in the blood too, right?
That would be kind of like, instead of the blood transfusion, that would kind of be like, not being overly righteous, I guess. Like, that's a good thing, because that can save your life.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you look at it, right? You know, I can see stuff both ways. You know, I don't know anything directly in the Bible that says you can't do it, but I know that mixing blood. They used to take, people used to back in the day. They used to take a blood test before you got married and to see if you were compatible or not. Because like even with me and my wife, we had 2 different blood types. So our children, they said that her immune system was attacking our kids, about killing her. She had to get a shot and stuff in order to stop that. So yeah, O negative and AB positive. So there's some stuff that blood don't work away for a reason. We don't understand that, right? But I'm not one way or the other. I can't be the soul like yes or no. That's your conviction with Yah. So if you don't feel like don't do it. If you feel like doing it, do it. Just make sure you protect that up to Yah. So
What about donate, actually donating, like people doing donations?
I don't see no issue with you donating it because you're not taking it. You're just taking it out, right? So, giving it for other people, I don't. That's a personal conviction. I don't unless somebody show me a scripture saying don't do it. They might have been doing it back in Egypt. They were doing some stuff in the Egyptian time. If you look at some of those things they were doing back then, brain surgeries and everything, way back then. So I don't know. Maybe they were doing it back then, and y'all might have something in there that I might have missed. But right now, I don't know anything that says you can't give blood. So wait a minute, which one am I on? So the last one. So after they had that council, they had another council. Let's read through the other council, right? So this is for the Gentiles. The other council is after Paul and them had went to Antioch and they came back with some good news. And let's see what happened. So next one. So this is in Acts 21, right? So it says, after we arrived in Jerusalem, so this is Acts, right? Who wrote Acts? Anybody know? Paul, not Paul. Disciple Paul. Who wrote the last, second to the last gospel? Matthew, Mark, Luke. Luke was a disciple of Paul, right? So he's the one that wrote Luke, book of Luke, and Acts, right? So, and Mark, they say is the disciple of Peter. So just keep that. So, and then Matthew is a first-hand account. Matthew was there, right, with Messiah. John was there with Messiah. Mark getting the second hand. Luke is getting the third because Paul didn't walk with Messiah, right? So he's getting a third-hand account. So just think that's why sometimes the stories are all on the line, but they still align in some way. So so it says after we arrived, so we is Luke and Paul, I think Barnabas, in Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly. And the following day, Paul went in with us to James. So James is who? It's not one of the disciples, was who? Somebody? The brother of the Messiah, right? So I don't know how he got power, but something happened after the Messiah had ascended where now everybody went to his brother. But other times in scripture, like during the time of Hanukkah and all that, his brothers were kind of rebuking Yahusha, saying, they were kind of like at odds with him. So I don't know what happened. It doesn't say in the Bible, but somehow James became the leader. I think the story is that he asked something about Yahusha's clothes, something kind of like Elijah and Elisha. His garment fell down, he put it on, he became prophet or something like that. He asked for double portion of his anointing, and something happened after that. I think it was something similar. That's the story. Can't say it's true. But then it says, and after he greeted them, he began to relate one by one the things which Yah had been done among the who? Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they began glorifying Yah. So it was a good thing that Gentiles were receiving Yahusha, right? And they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews. Saying that it's Gentiles who are among the Jews that were basically of those who have believed. And they are zealous for what? The Gentiles are zealous for the law, right? So why would we now say that you don't have to keep the law? And the Gentiles were even zealous for the law back then, right? So it says, verse 21, and they have been told about you that you are teaching all the who? Jews who are among the Gentiles. So now he's flipping it. First he was talking about the Gentiles that was among the Jews who are happy for keeping the law, right? They zealous, they converting. Now he's talking about the Jews who are among the Gentiles. So he switched subjects now, right? He says that you are teaching the Jews who are among the Gentiles to what? Forsake Moses. He's rebuking them, telling them not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What customs is he talking about? Tanakh, Torah, right? What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Therefore, do this that we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. That's the Nazarite vow thing you kind of talking about. Take them and purify yourself with them and pay the expenses so that they may shave their heads, and all will know that there is nothing to the things which they have been told about you, and that you yourself also walk orderly, doing what? Keeping the law. So they were for keeping the law. They were for keeping the feast days and all that stuff, right? So that's the big difference that was happening, right? The Gentiles, they took it too far, right? They said, oh, we can do this 4 things, and then it start changing to, oh, it's by grace and all that stuff, right? Constantine put the stamp on it and saying, we're not going to keep all that stuff anymore. I think we read that one time before. But it says, he makes sure it's understood. He says in 25, but concerning the Gentiles who have believed, we wrote. He's making sure, like we wrote back in the day, in the earlier verse, having decided that they should abstain from meat sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and what is fornication. Then Paul took them in, and the next day, purifying himself along with them, went into the temple, giving notice of the completion of the days of purification until the sacrifice was offered for each one of them. So he was still doing temple stuff. Yahushua had gone, but he's still keeping the law and doing because the temple is still standing. All right? So just want to make sure you brought out that because you can see the difference. If we're Israelites, if we're the Bambaras and the airways and all this, we're supposed to be still keeping what Yah has told us, right? And even those who come into our people, the Gentiles, it says in Isaiah 56, it says that even they will be received if they honor the Sabbath and be zealous for the law. So that's in Isaiah. That's in the Tanakh. So we can see that Yah has his order and set. He didn't get rid of it. He basically allowed Yahushua come in to help establish what he was already telling. That's why it says the whole book is written for him, right? All right, so I'm not going to go into all these other things, but, that's why it's important. And I've been through this lesson before, but I want to get to this one thing. Yeah, go all the way down till you start seeing the medieval source book. Go through all this. So go back to that man. This is important. This guy, he's a Gentile, right? He is a historian. He goes by and telling people how the Roman paganism came into the church. He's a historian. He's still a Bible believer. He wrote a whole book and he had a museum and everything in Tennessee. I wasn't trying to go, but he just, after COVID, they closed it. He's getting older, a lot older. So next, he started talking about, these are the pagan. He said, this is the temple of Sol Invictus, right? Mithra. And then next, he says, basically, then invincible God Mithra, and that's where they start calling their people fathers and mothers. You heard of church fathers and church mothers? Isn't that interesting? That they were calling them that way back then. But anyway, next. Keep on going. Oh, go back up. One more. Yeah. So this is the Sunday law of Constantine's. Constantine was the one that made a lot of those changes, right? You see on his coin, he has Mithra, the sun god. So how did he convert to Christianity and say he was believing the Messiah if he's basically still having his coin with the sun god minted up there? And then he had this ark built for him with the sun god represented after the time he was supposed to convert to Christianity, right? And then he forced everybody to keep the Sabbath on Sunday instead of along with the Israelites. He said, the Israelites, you want nothing to do with the Israelites. So that he's the one that changed a lot of that. All right, next. Keep going. Yeah, so this is an important piece. Go up one. So this is a synagogue in Israel in the 6th century. So 500 to 600 AD. What color are these people? That's supposed to be Moses with, Abraham with Isaac. That's what that's supposed to be. That's how they depicted them. The Jewish people depicted them in the 6th century there. But later on in the 6th century in Europe, they were being persecuted in Spain. And they basically said were forced the Jews to promise to eat pork. They were forcing them to convert, forcing them to get rid of their customs, right? So next, and it's important because the Nazarenes were the ones that we said that believed in the Messiah, right? So what's wrong with them still following the Messiah and doing the feast days, right? So if they're the same people, what they'll usually teach is that the Nazarenes end up becoming Christians and it changed. So this is in the 6th century, right? Like 700 AD, 690s, around there. But it says the Jews of Toledo. Toledo's where? Spain. Toledo, Spain, right? And I said, well, what were we called in slavery, after slavery? Negroes. What is that? Spanish word. We were living in Spain. So these are some of the black Jews living in Spain, right? So they had to convert to the Catholic faith, right? He was forcing them to, he says there, undertaking for future not to become involved in any Jewish rites or customs, nor to associate with their cursed Jews who remain unbaptized. So he's rebuking them, right? And then later on, he even talks about you can't get circumcised, you can't celebrate Passover, you're not supposed to keep the Sabbath, any other feast days. So he's rebuking them. And it comes important because the next slide, one more slide, right here. So in the yellow, he says, I anathematize the Nazarenes. So if they were all Bible believers, why is he sending them to hell? They both believe in the Messiah. So what's the issue? This is when you start seeing that hate and that people attacking people for keeping the feast days because they, in Spain, were basically killing them and then end up being what? Slave trade. That's what later on turned into transatlantic slave trade. So they start sending our people to Barbados and all the stuff that we read, running us down to Africa. They still got people that from Spain that knew they were Israelites that moved. They live in West Africa now, even to this day, knowing that they're still the Israelites from Spain. They know their customs and some of the same places that we were taken and sent to America. So just want to make sure I brought all that out. The difference between a Nazarene and a Christian. All right. Any questions? I'll stop there. All right. So this is important because after that, you start getting to the other period in times where, you know, we start talking more about the Second Temple period and how all that stuff came about. All right. So let us stand. Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for this day. Thank you for all the things that you're doing for us. We thank you for your word and help us to continue to get clarity and follow you and do what you called us to do in this time, that we know that you have a plan for us and we just want to do what pleases you. We want to live by your word, walk in your ways, and do the things that you called us to do in this time, to be a light even unto the Gentiles, to have our conduct in a way that pleases you, that people can't no longer talk about you by talking about the people that you have called to be in your ambassadors here on earth, and those that also love you. We ask you to watch over us and keep us, help us to continue to learn more about who you are and who we are to you, and more importantly, what your son did to die for our sins, and help us to prepare for his return in the same way he came. We know that people missed the prophecies of him being the Messiah. In the same way, people want to miss the prophecies on how he will return. So help us to be ready, to shine your light, to do your will, and to glorify your name. We ask you to also to bless this food we're about to receive for nourishment from our body. Thank for everyone who came. Keep them safe on their way as they return. And we just ask you to just continue to bless us so we can come back with testimonies of all the things that you're doing in our life, to build and edify one another as well. We love you. We praise you. In Yahushua HaMashiach's name we do pray. Hallelujah. Amen.